it's almost like waking up on Christmas morning when you can actually finally get hold of the FTP, the Future Tours program, and then we just know what's going to happen, hopefully, in the next few years. It's great, isn't it? Like Christmas.
Well, it is. Yeah, it's really exciting, and we get a good look at, I suppose, the growth of the women's game. That's probably the biggest thing that stands out to me, and it's going to new frontiers and treading ground that has otherwise been untouched previously. So it's really exciting stuff. Can't wait to get into it.
Well, let us indeed get into it. Let's roll those titles and get on with the show. Hello everyone and welcome to Timed Out for Sporting News with the great Callum Ferguson. We're very excited. We've got a special edition today that's discussing the Women's FTP Future Tours program that has just been announced. So we've been looking over it and we've got a few things in there that we think are going to be particularly relevant for Australia. It's the Australian FTP that we've been given, but it gives us some clues about what's happening internationally as well. So some great stuff to look at, Cal. I guess one of the first things that you notice is that there is a standalone Women's Ashes. So it's always been played at the same time or the same summer as the men's. But in 2025, when the men aren't playing any tests in Australia, there will be a standalone multi-format series. That's quite a development, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge news, and I think it shows how well held the previous Ashes were last summer here in Australia by the cricketing public and by Cricket Australia as well. English cricket, the ECB, I think everyone saw it as a huge success. I know the Australian cricket team certainly did. I'm not sure about the England women, but certainly it left them in good shape going into the World Cup in New Zealand. So I think it was a huge win for everyone, and I think rightly it gets its own clear air, the Women's Ashes, and it'll make for a fantastic summer for the women's game here in Australia. But also I think it hopefully breaks ground for some of the other nations around the world that might be looking at, having a major women's series held in their home summers.
Absolutely, and I mean, just the thing about clear air, something that I have always noticed, especially going back a few years, is that like if say England are doing badly in the men's Ashes, and they're doing well in the women's Ashes, there's this kind of people go, oh yeah, but we're doing well in the other one. It's a bit sort of patronising. Yeah, and the same goes the other way. If the Australian men have a bad match, it's like, but hey, at least the women are doing well. And hopefully this absolutely puts that to bed and allows them to just play in their own right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if nothing else, and we'll get on to more of the fixtures as we go, but, this is great signs for the women's game. I think if you look at the way the game has been fast-tracked in the last 5 years compared to the last 50, I mean, we're going at light speed at the minute in comparison. So it's great to see, and, the news coming out of these fixtures, this is just one of the many great news stories to come out of the fixtures. But the Women's Ashes series here in Australia was wonderful, and it's great to see it getting its own stomping ground,
absolutely,
so to speak.
Absolutely. Now, on that, talking of multi-format series and Australia and Test matches, so the plan is that in the FTP that Australia in January and February of every summer they want to host a multi-format series. So it won't be this summer because of World Cup, but the following summer it'll be South Africa, which is really exciting to see South Africa. They actually struggled in a multi-format series here in England this summer, but they are moving forward in trying to play more Test cricket, which is pretty exciting. Then we have the Women's Ashes that we just spoke about. Then we have India returning after that very entertaining series last year. Yeah, so the only problem is, Cal, there's no one to play the following year after that. So Cricket Australia really want to find someone else to play a multi-format series. but no country seems to be willing at the moment. Not even New Zealand. And I know, speaking to some New Zealand players, they are so frustrated. They are desperate to play Test cricket. So, but for now, New Zealand cricket doesn't seem to be willing to invest in it. It's a bit disappointing, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine those women being really frustrated. I think we've got to understand as well, though, that Cricket Australia and the women's game has grown exponentially in this country, and certainly in England as well. There's been enormous investment made. We've seen certainly the BCCI starting to really get into motion finally, which is great news, certainly for the women's game. It's going to potentially take a bit of time for some of the other nations to catch up. So I'll probably give them a little bit of a pass at the moment, New Zealand, but I think they're getting a hurry on from some of the other nations, there's no doubt about it. And I'm thankful that Australia is one of those nations that's giving them the hurry along, because we've seen what a huge win we've had here with the WBBL, and certainly over in England, the Women's 100, how well that's going. And I think once the Women's IPL kicks off, I think that's when we're going to see some serious gears in motion with the women's game. And it's going to spread like wildfire. I'm certainly hopeful of that and quite confident of it.
I think that is the hope that it will. The obvious question is the depth in women's cricket in other countries. And the reason Australia has got depth is that they've invested at the domestic level and made that, they're going through semi-professionalism, trying to make it fully professional. So it's going to be hard for those teams. It would be great if a country or a board put its hand up and said, okay, we want to play in that 26-27 Australian summer. So it's 2027, so there's a few years to prepare for it. That's a goal. So what do we do to get ourselves to that point? That's where I hope it ends up anyway. The door's open, is my understanding.
Yes.
The door is open. So come on in.
Well, I'd be surprised if we don't see. I'd be surprised if we don't have that gap filled within the next 12, 18 months. So I think someone will jump into it. They'll see how great the continued success of the Australian women's cricket summer is after another great summer, no doubt. And then once the women's IPL kicks off, I think it's just going to be a snowball effect. I'm pretty confident of that. On the back of what's been really a runaway train over the last 5 years, as I mentioned before, comparatively to the previous 4 or 5 decades in the women's game, it's really exciting time for women's cricket.
Now, you mentioned women's IPL. This is very interesting, I think. It's something that the men's game can only dream of, but they've basically put in a clear window for 3 domestic tournaments, not just one. So the WBBL gets a clear window of international cricket. The Women's 100 in England gets its clear window, and they've also created a window for March in anticipation of the Women's IPL. So there's still lots we don't know about that. They've said it's going to happen. BCCI said, it's going to happen, but we haven't really said any more than that. But the fact that they've been able to create 3 windows for 3 major tournaments, the people who schedule the men's game just must go, if only.
I've got no doubt they do. It is a huge advantage, I suppose, from a fixturing standpoint that the women's game has at the moment, because it's still really it's in its infancy to an extent, I suppose. However, it's great that they've mapped out some periods of time for the larger T20 tournaments domestically for the women's game, because what it'll do is enable a lot of eyes to be on the best there is on offer from the women's game, and I think that's how we're really going to grab the imagination of the next generation of women's cricketers, the next generation of men and women that consume the game. I think they're really going to make hay while the sun shines here. I think over the next few years, we've already seen great momentum behind the women's game over the last 4 or 5 years. We've seen the success of the women's BBL. We've seen the success of the women's 100 as well. It's just gaining such great momentum, and now that we've got a big gap for the women's IPL, I think, in all honesty, this is a great period of time for the women's game, and they're allowing the game to flourish by leaving these big gaps in the schedule for the T20 game.
And what it also does is it allows for, I guess, particularly players from not Australia or England in particular, maybe India, but players from other countries who are able to get those contracts. I mean, I had a player from another country tell me that she got more for one WBBL contract than she did for the whole year in playing for her country. So that's what it means for those women, not just the experience, but some of them can actually start earning, decent money.
Yeah, that's right. It's fantastic, and it'll allow them to be professional, which is even better. I think we've seen, to a lesser extent, in the men's game, players from some of the smaller nations be able to do something similar, make more money from the domestic game than they are with their home nations playing international cricket. But the difference with this is it will enable these women to become professional full-time athletes and cricketers. And again, that's another huge step forward, and it's spreading the love, spreading the wealth that's within cricket, and reaching to further regions, which again it creates growth within the game, and it's going to be something that we need to continue to help along, because we want more people being able to access the game at higher levels, to gain experience at higher levels. It's certainly something that has worked well for the men's game, and I think that it's been great to see, particularly over the last few years in the women's game, that being fast-tracked, and we're hopefully going to see that gap be bridged quicker than what we've ever seen it, which is what we want.
It's certainly interesting. Just one other thing that with all the various fixtures that are being played you have in 23-24 that year away, Australia are playing 3 ODIs in Ireland and 3 ODIs and 3 T20s in Bangladesh. Bit of an historic move there. So that's encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it really is. And it just shows, I guess, the willingness of particularly the Cricket Australia administrators to take the game forward and help it grow. And I think that's great commitment. I think we can all be really proud of the way Cricket Australia and the Australian Cricketers Association have really forged a path in the women's game and taken it forward and allowed it to grow. And this is another step forward on that front, taking the women's game to Bangladesh, helping grow the game further in Europe is fantastic. And I think that, again, this is just a real momentum gather and a snowball effect that I'm hoping to see more of in the coming years. Wouldn't it be great to see countries like India and Pakistan touring Ireland and Bangladesh, really spreading the love. And I think that the game as a whole will benefit. We've seen it in the men's game. It's a proven path, because the more cricketers we've got from nations around the world, more countries taking the game seriously, the stronger the game will be in the long run. We know that. So it's great to see.
Along with the Under-19s World Cup and followed by another Women's World Cup. So ICC events all over the place, but...
There are. I said that to you the other day. It just, when we started to hear murmurings of what might be in this fixturing, we were talking about what might be, and we were talking about how many ICC events we've been seeing in recent years, obviously with COVID ruling out some of those tournaments for a few years. Well, we're going to be snowed under by ICC events over the coming years, and more of it, I say.
Absolutely. Well, some people, of course, might be a little bit disappointed that we're still only going to see one test a year, but I guess that's the trade-off in making sure that there is at least once a year until there are more countries willing to play tests.
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people. One a year, I think. I think we're almost going to have to look at ourselves as fortunate after some of the comments coming from the ICC over the last few months. But we'd like to see a lot more of it, wouldn't we?
Absolutely. Well, it's a starting point. Let's see what happens from here. Great to talk to you, Cal. Looking forward to discussing so many of these series in the future with you as well. And we will also have a special timed out on the Australian men's FTP and what that means for the next few years. There's some interesting things in that as well. So make sure you check that out too. We've got all the information on Sporting News Australia. So until then, enjoy your cricket.